Recording in progress.
Your meeting is live.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of January 20th, 2022. Someone put the wrong date on. We'll start with roll call.
Chair Pevsner.
Here.
Vice Chair Dennison is absent today. Commissioners Dallas.
Here.
Hutt.
Here.
And Spears.
Present.
Very good. Thank you. We'll go on to the approval of the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda. Second.
Okay, seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Moving on.
Chair
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, because we're doing a remote meeting, state law requires that we do roll call votes for everything. Just one hoop we have to jump through.
So everybody has to.
So Ms. Peterson will read off the names when you ask to, and then we can do a roll call vote.
Okay, go ahead and Judd.
So Chair Pevsner?
Aye.
Commissioner Dallas?
Aye.
Commissioner Hutt?
Yes.
Commissioner Spears?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Then that passes unanimously. Excellent. Next is the approval of the minutes of December 2nd, I believe it is. Yes. Any comments, changes?
No. I move the minutes be approved.
So moved. Second. And seconded. And I guess we need a roll call vote.
Chair Pevsner?
Yes. Aye.
Commissioner Dallas?
Yes.
Commissioner Hutt?
Yes.
And Commissioner Spears?
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you. All right, moving on to our council liaison report. Apparently we have a new council liaison. Welcome.
Thank you. I have no report per se, but good to know that that's going to be on the agenda. So
okay.
I will keep that in mind, but no report for tonight. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Very good. All right, so the next item is the community input section. We're going on, this is a section where normally, if we have a crowd, we have anybody that wants to come up and speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. And I guess we'll give them 5 minutes. If we have anybody in the wings waiting to speak, let us know. And we'll post the number and the meeting number and the password so you can make a comment.
And Chair Pevsner, if I could just make a comment while we're waiting, if anyone else is going to be joining us. We did receive 2 public comments. They were emailed to the planning commissioners. They were also, those emails were posted to our city website, so everybody is able to view those. And that will be the procedure moving forward. We will not be reading off the individual emails. People will be able to provide a public comment by 5 p.m. That gives staff enough time to have that posted to our website where they could view those emails also.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And Vincent, where are those posted? Whereabouts do you find those on the website?
Jen, where did you put those today?
Those are on the city website where you would find the Planning Commission packets. There will be an additional file there that will say public comment. And either where you go to the agendas, there's a link or there's another archive file. I would like to just note for the record that the comments that we received for tonight's meeting were from Lisa Puleo and Kristen Stevens.
And both of the comments were regarding El Verno Heights Academy filming events.
So point of clarification, this is public comment that is not on the agenda, as opposed to when we move forward, the people who have public comment on they will be able to read them directly into the record?
No, we would still be using, the same procedure will occur. They have the opportunity to post them. They send them to us, we send them to the commission, and we don't read them, but they're available for anyone else to view.
Will the public who logs on during our meeting be able to speak at the appropriate time for the item in which we are discussing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
They will be patched in as we've done in the past.
Okay.
So, okay, going forward, do we have anybody waiting to make a comment that's on something that's not on the agenda?
You do not currently have any callers looking to make public comment.
Okay, well, maybe we can. We'll wait another minute or so here. Let me just trying to get into the. Okay. 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 All right, well, maybe we'll just move along then to our first discussion item. Number one, the discussion regarding the amending Title 17, zoning chapters 1729 and adding a new chapter 1739 of the Sierra Madre Municipal Code. Do we have a preliminary report? I know we have like a red line copy here.
We have a red line copy. We also have a PowerPoint presentation by our consultant, Phil Burns, and Claire Lynn is also available, and she can also go through the material as well.
Okay.
So who is going to start?
I can start. So tonight we'll be discussing the Municipal Code text amendment regarding Chapter 17.29 for the multiple family residential high density zone, and introducing a new Chapter 17.39 on the religious housing overlay zone. The City Council adopted the 6th cycle housing element and directed staff and the Planning Commission to continue to work on the ordinances. And we will continue our discussion with Mr. Phil Burns of the Arroyo Group from the last October meeting. And now I will turn it over to Phil for the PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chair Pesner, commissioners. And pleasure to be with you virtually, I suppose. And nice to meet you there, Commissioner Dallas. I know this is I guess the first meeting in which, in which I participated, in which you're on the commission as well. I want to check that everyone is hearing me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. All right. I'm noticing a few screens freezing up there, but as long as you can hear me, I think we're good. I'm going to jump, before I open up my presentation slides for today, I just want to say that the presentation I'm going to give sort of presupposes the previous discussion that we had in September and October related to the religious housing overlay and the R320 and R330 zones. So to, for the benefit of Commissioner Dallas, I'll just recap very briefly what we did during those meetings, was we were talking about the housing element in general, and both of these things are really required rezones that result from the housing element. So during those presentations, I presented some very simple massing studies that we had done that would help us understand what kind of development standards, heights, setbacks, open space, parking, et cetera, would we be able to establish that can hit the density that we need for housing element compliance, while at the same time kind of protecting the character, the visual character of the town. And so I have those massing studies, on reserve. I'm not going to present all of them again tonight, but should you like me to bring them up, on hand for the discussion. So with that, I'll just go ahead and bring up the slides then. Right. All right, great. So we're talking about, as I mentioned, two different required rezonings from the housing element. The first one is the religious housing overlay, and that is being applied to the United Methodist Church as well as the Old North Church. Per our previous discussions and per the housing element, the religious housing overlay is a type of housing that is a zoning district that requires affordable housing to be constructed with it. It's not for market rate housing. So a minimum 50% of units must be affordable to qualify under the religious housing overlay. I'm sorry, are you all hearing that?
Yes.
Beeping behind me?
It's not my car.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, it's not my car either, but okay, I hope that's it. In any case, no, there it goes again. All right. The religious housing overlay allows the development standards that we talked about for it are to allow repurposing of church parking into affordable housing, to establish a 2-story maximum height for the first 40 feet away from any street except for Michelinda Avenue, to establish a 3-story maximum height, 35 feet elsewhere. And certainly we had discussion about that, whether that was necessary, but this is what was proposed. And then to have it exempt from lot coverage and FAR standards. However, requiring 175 square feet of open space minimum per unit. I am so sorry. Would it be all right if I take a 1-minute break to address this situation so you can all hear me?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Sorry about that.
While we're waiting for Phil, is it possible maybe we could have a little bit of an update from staff or the city attorney on where the housing element process is and the feedback that we got from HCD? I mean, because the big question has always been, do we have to have 3 stories or not? And I don't think we ever got good guidance on that.
Yeah, good idea.
So our conversations with HCD, and we shared with them that we were going back to look at, and that's what Phil's going to be explaining, what it'll look like with a 2-story massing model, which he can do, and by reducing setbacks. HCD's expressed skepticism, and they saw that as our 2-story height limit as a hindrance. So currently they're reviewing the housing element that was adopted by the city council. So we're waiting to hear back, waiting to hear their feedback.
So it sounds like if they expressed initial skepticism that we're going to need to accommodate 3 stories, at least in some places.
Right, it looks like we will be doing that for the religious housing overlay.
Okay.
At 2 sites.
Thank you so much for your patience. I suppose this is part of doing remote meetings, part of what we have to deal with. But I'm glad we're discussing kind of the key issue at hand here. The other required rezone is the high density residential, as Claire mentioned, and there were 4 different sites Among these sites where the high density residential designation was to be applied, we have the 200 block of Mariposa and the less up to 100 block of Suffolk, which of course involve multiple properties along them. And so there's two different zoning districts within that, the R320, which is a minimum 20 units per acre, and the R330, which is a minimum 30 units per acre. And so here is just as a reminder, here is the yield study that one of the yield studies that we conducted for the R330 zone, looking at a combination of two properties next to the City Hall parking lot at 261 and 271 West Mariposa Avenue, basically showing that it was possible to fit the number of units on this property in kind of a two-story garden style development type structure, as long as these units are apartments and sort of apartment sized. They're not townhome sized, obviously, here. And then we have a reduced parking ratio that would come from the affordable housing standards, which the city already has on its code. And there you can see some of how the FAR shakes out the lot coverage and the amount of open space per unit. Reminder too that this is just a simple massing study. That's why it doesn't you don't see it looking pretty like a real development would. It's just to indicate where the different units could be located. So what did what did the state HCD and the housing element have to say about all of these required rezones? All right, so first point, we talked about this before, but I just want us to keep it in mind. The housing element rezone sites must allow development without a discretionary approval process. We proposed a preliminary design review on the part of the Planning Commission, but it should be noted, the commission will not have the authority to say no to a project. The commission will have the authority to make recommendations to improve the design of the project. Because additionally, because the city lacks a higher density residential development track record, the city, basically HCD is making the city put a minimum density requirement on these zones. So you actually will not be able to build lower density housing within these zones. You will have to build it up to the, between the minimum and the maximum densities in order to be permitted in this zone. And the reason for that is just so that, HCD, HCD doesn't want cities, I suppose, arbitrarily creating, higher density zoning in areas where the market actually does not support that kind of higher density development. So they put this minimum standard on us. Additionally, the city needs to provide incentives for lot consolidation in both the R320 and R330 zones. That was something that came in the letter from HCD that now is incorporated in the adopted housing element. Important here, highlighted, right? The housing element does state that the religious housing overlay will allow 3-story development more than 40 feet away from public streets at a minimum as a by right concession. Again, everything in the religious housing overlay is going to be an affordable housing project. So, would be, could request concessions. And then in HCD's communication with the city, as Vincent mentioned, they've expressed a lot of skepticism that any zone that's 30 units per acre or higher, that development at that density can realistically be built under a 2-story height limit, despite the fact that we showed it in the massing model, right? But they say that their experience with development is that it requires 3 stories for what the market requires. So again, here's the yield study that I just showed you. I'm going to show you now how we think we could accommodate a 3rd story in a way that is, again, still protective of the visual and built character of the town. Oh, I'm sorry, before I get to that, let me just recap what the major development standards were that resulted from those initial massing studies, and which you will find in the proposed code language that you have before you for R320 and R330. So a minimum lot size of 11,000 square feet. That's slightly down from the R3 minimum lot size. As I mentioned, this permitted density range, where there's a minimum and there's a maximum. So minimum of 20, maximum of 24 for R320. Minimum of 30, maximum of 34 for R330. We'll talk about that more during discussion you desire. Minimum front yard setback of 15 feet for the 1st and 2nd stories. I know that there was certainly interest in requiring the 2nd story to be stepped back from the 1st story. However, as you'll see in a second, we're going to be looking at that kind of standard for the 3rd story. Preliminary design review by Planning Commission as the only kind of public hearing that would take place for these projects. A maximum floor area ratio of 1, except for 8 to 10 unit developments, in which it would be 1.25. And the reason for the 1.25 is that there is a state law, indeed, the new state law, that requires a floor area ratio no less, or, requires that you can't restrict it to be less than 1.25 for 8 to 10 unit developments. You can't restrict it to be less than 1 for developments that are 3 to 7 units, I believe, either. 250 square feet of open space per unit. And critically,
are we going to do questions as we go, or do you want us to save them up, or?
I know there's a lot of good stuff. I guess I would like to finish out the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
And I will try to make it quick because I know that we'll have a wonderful discussion about all these things. 250 square feet of open space per unit. Locating it on the ground level is a huge deal, different than the requirements for religious housing, but I think critical to keeping the village kind of character of the town. And then to establish lot consolidation incentives. As I mentioned before, we have to create some kind of lot consolidation incentive. So why not make the lot consolidation incentive to allow the 3rd story? And that would be triggered when the frontage is wider than 100 feet. So basically when you have 2 or more lots that are put together, you're allowed to do the 3rd story with very particular standards. If you don't, you have to stick to the 2-story. So wanted to look at, okay, how can we make 3 stories fit well into the town? Where does the first place you start to look is around Sierra Madre. And where do we see 3-story development? Where is it working? Where is it not working? So here's a recently constructed project on Highland. You can see here the 3rd story being set back from the street, and the building facade hides it quite a bit. Here at the senior housing development on Mariposa, I believe it is, similarly, the upper, in this case, both the 2nd and the 3rd floor, are set back from the street and the building facade. From here, you wouldn't necessarily notice it. You get up close, you notice it's a 3-story building. Okay, here's another townhome project in which they've used the slope, being that the rear of the property is lower than the front of the property, to hide the third story, or in this case, actually to hide the garage story, basically. So there are definitely examples of three-story developments here at Madre. Showing a couple of examples from Pasadena now. Other strategies that can help kind of reduce the bulk and the mass of the third story is to use smaller third story elements rather than creating an overall wing of the building or an overall building itself that is three-story. In this case, what you probably have is multi-story units. So you have an interior staircase, and that of course works well for larger size units, more family type units, and then limiting the total amount of third story square footage. So you can see here in these different developments built along South Marengo in Pasadena, how only a certain part of the property is actually developed to 3 stories, the rest of it developed to 2 stories. So back to this, let's apply what we've learned there to this. And I'm gonna mention then 3 requirements that I think that we could put on third story development in the R320 and R330 zones. The first is the setback requirement, requiring it to be located at least 45 feet away from any public street. The second is to create a maximum dimension to it. This is kind of those smaller volumes on the third story, proposed here 45 feet, might be a little larger, but that's what's proposed right now. And then also maximum area as well, where there's, set that at, for proposal at 20% or no more than 20% of the lot area can be covered by third story elements. So I think that is all I've got. That is indeed. So I'll turn it back over to Claire or Vincent, or directly to questions as they would like.
Claire, do you want to interject something, or do you want to let us ask questions?
We can start with questions.
Okay, let's go ahead. John, you had some questions?
Yeah, I had questions on the new state law with regard to FAR and how that applies. Is that only applicable to these that have to do with our housing element, or is that, does that apply everywhere in town?
It applies to missing middle development. Alex is the one that got the that found that law, because actually I didn't know about it either. It was just, I think it just went into effect, I don't know if this year or last year. I think we could look that up for you while we're discussing.
Okay. Yeah, my other thing is, and I'm heartened when you said there was a minimum number of units, because one of my big concerns when I read through the proposed development concepts was that the minimum is really sort of hidden in here, and I think we need to do a better job of making it clear that there's a minimum density, because if you could just expand the FAR, the height, and not require that density, somebody could just build a really big single family house, right? And that's totally contrary to what we want to do. And so I think we need to be more clear about the minimum. And then I want to know what happens, like one of these houses that's zoned, that we're proposing to do the 20 zone on, just recently sold. And it's a single family house now. What if they want to do a room addition? So they've got a single family house and they want to add a bedroom off to the side. Can they not do that because it's not enough dwelling units?
Yeah, very, very good question, certainly. On, definitely understood about the minimum density, needing to make that more apparent or more easy to understand there. I know that one of the concerns that has been brought up as well is that, sometimes you may not only have development of like adding an addition on, but you may have development of, where somebody wants to build, say, townhomes that might come in under the minimum density. And I think that is something that is a drawback of this approach, at least for the R330 zone. But, again, we're on the state requirement to do that.
I think we need to address, because I think as it's currently written, it leaves this ambiguity as to what happens if somebody wants to do a very minor improvement on their property, or they want to do a development that's a much lower density. Can they do that? Are they not allowed? What if they are allowed to do it? What development thresholds? Because when I read this through, I didn't catch the minimum, and so my thought was, well, we should say these development standards only apply to densities that actually meet the minimum we're talking about. And if somebody wanted to do something else, it would have to fall under the existing R3 development standards. I mean, if we could just prohibit that, except for maybe very limited expansions or repair, that would be even better. The big concern is that we allow this extra development rights on these lots. Somebody builds something that doesn't meet our RENA numbers, and then we got to go rezone a whole bunch of other lots.
Commissioner Hunt, regarding your question about the state law.
Yeah.
The state law in question is SB 478. It applies to, let's see, it's not limited to projects subject to the housing element. It's throughout the city and applies to those developments that are located in a multifamily zone. Says here above greater than 3 units. So it isn't something limited to, these projects because they're part of our RENA.
So that would it basically it's amending our R3 code as well.
Right.
Are there any exceptions? I mean, one of the things I was thinking is instead of just having, an FAR that's for the whole thing, is if we could say, you get the FAR under the old R3 code, but then for every unit above the R3 density, you get like another 1,000 square feet to encourage people to build more units as opposed to just bigger townhomes, bigger single family homes. Doesn't sound like we can pull that off with the new state law, but that was the concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's look into that together if you don't mind.
I think it could be possible because, the R3 zone on a normal sized lot does not allow 3 units, right? At 13 units per acre, it's 2 units per lot. So, it could be. I think there is flexibility to do that. I certainly hear you about the single family additions. It does seem a little bit sort of cruel to not allow a single family addition in this. So I believe that we certainly could amend it to include that, but I think we want to check with Karen Warner, our housing element consultant, just to make sure that we wouldn't run afoul of the, of what we've committed to in the housing.
Yeah, I mean the thing is if somebody has a sort of single family home on a lot that's one of these, and there's at least one of them, and maybe there's some others, and they're getting sort of near the end of their functional life, if you allow someone to revamp that house and maybe do an addition, maybe not, maybe just clean it up. The problem is it's not going to convert to multifamily. And normally I would say, well, people get to do whatever they want on their property, but all of these people were approached, right, to be on this list. So they signed up for this. It's a different beast than just any other site in town. So I feel less worry about, saying you can't do the development we don't want to, because, all these people voluntarily signed up for this. So I think the problem is if we don't encourage people to do what's required under the housing element, we're gonna have a bigger mess. We're gonna have to find more properties, and it's not easy to do.
So I'm a little confused. Did you just argue both sides of that, John?
Well, yeah, I did,
Okay.
but I said this is special because normally, if this were a normal zoning, I would say that that's overly restrictive, right? But these are only a few lots that all these people volunteered to be in this zoning, right? So I think it's sort of different than a normal, you know, a normal house, normal apartment building. I think those people under, you know, normal sort of zoning thoughts. But here, these people voluntarily agreed to try to build these developments that'll get us RENA compliance for our housing element. So we should, you know, really hold their feet to the fire and say, okay, you guys volunteered to do it, now go do it.
Is it a matter of it also penciling out that they need to do so many units in order for them to break even or make a profit on this? Or is it all driven by the RENA numbers?
Well, I think those are two different questions. I mean, from the city's perspective, it's RENA numbers. From a developer perspective, it's just all square feet. I mean, that's, in a lot of ways, you're better off to maximize your bottom line to build big and build fewer issues, especially with the way our fees go that are charged per unit, right? And so if you're not, you know, this is different than the second part with the churches, because they're doing affordable housing and those are special programs. But if you're just trying to develop to maximize profit, you know, there's a big incentive to do fewer bigger townhomes, right, than there is to do more smaller apartments. And that's the problem we face with trying to zone this stuff so that we could get this density, when I think the market is going to push developers
In the
not
other
to go
direction.
there. Yeah.
Well, I was kind of worried about that because they've agreed to what? When they asked for the zoning change, they've agreed to build the minimum 20 or 24 or 30 or what? So they knew what they were getting into? Or are we setting that standard now that's going to go back over to them and say, by the way, you know, because you've agreed to be in this zoning area, you are going to end up with 24 units on this lot?
No, I think that question's to you, sir.
To me?
Yeah.
Well, perhaps I would ask staff, because I have not been in communication with the property owners. So I'm unaware of the outreach that was done with them.
Yeah, Commissioner Spears, basically they sign up to be part of a ministerially approved process. So once this ordinance is created, we're basically going to rubber stamp their development, assuming it meets all the development standards that we're going to outline in this ordinance. I believe that whatever they develop, they have to develop up to that minimum range. So if it's 30, it's, what was it, Phil? It's 30 and 34?
30 to 34, yeah.
So they have to build something within that window. But if it meets all the requirements of the ordinance, there is going to be no substantive design review process. It's going to be this preliminary design review where we can provide suggestions on their design, but ultimately it's going to be the Director Gonzalez that signs off on it.
Well, I'm kind of curious because they already committed to this program, but now we're setting up what the numbers are, and I don't know. Did they understand that?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the other issue is that when you talk sort of generalities and like the whole zoned area, it's one thing, but when you look at individual lots, you know, the math might work out to do 19 units to the acre, and one more unit is going to put you, you know, to 28 units to the acre, right? Which you can't do. And so have we actually like looked at the individual lots and figured out how many units equals how much density? Because I know that on the one on Baldwin, when we did the housing element, I think that they said that the applicant had a preliminary plan that was at 19 units to the acre, which is less than the minimum we're requiring here at 20. And given the size of that lot, I don't have the math in front of me, but I don't know what one more unit pushes that one to.
Well, isn't that a function of the size of the units you're putting in? You can vary the unit sizes and make the math work.
Well, but you can't vary the lot size, right?
Right, but you can.
So can we go back to that? Do you have that chart that shows the? I think the property on Baldwin is the smallest one.
Yeah, I can tell you the minimum. So we did indeed look at that issue. When the lot size is less than 11,000 square feet, you could have a situation in which there is no integer number of units that falls within that small window.
So doesn't, yeah.
And that's why the minimum lot size is set at 11,000 square feet. But I'll bring that up. I'll bring that up again.
So I'm trying to understand the issue that you first brought up, John, where that says somebody signed up for this, they're, you know, they've lived in the property all their life, they intend to, you know, they signed up to, so the property will sell for a lot more when they're no longer living there and the family inherits it. So, but that works out just fine, it seems like, as a concept. But what if somebody in the family wants to keep it as a heritage thing and not ever develop it? Is that the problem we're concerned about?
Well, I don't think you can force somebody to not keep it as it is, but
Yeah.
you could say, if you signed up to do a minimum of 30, you can't build 12, you know?
That's right, but if they just wanted to live in it and maybe make an addition on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's at some point you've got to allow some flexibility, right? If something's falling apart, people need to be able to fix it, all that kind of stuff. But you don't want, you don't want, what's this, realistic capacity of 17. You don't want them coming in with 6, right?
And Commissioner Dallas, if for whatever reason the property doesn't develop within this 8-year housing element cycle, and it fails to, so I believe by the next cycle, we have to justify why this site should remain as a potential development site. And if it fails to develop for the second cycle, I think under current law, we can't list this site in the third housing element cycle to come.
Interesting.
Is the realistic capacity on this chart additional units or total units?
I believe it's total units, although we would have to ask Karen to
Well,
sure.
I mean, the issue you have is on 215 North Baldwin. That's a density of 15 units to the acre, so they're under the minimum. And yeah, and so's number 3. So hopefully these are additional capacity.
Yeah. Right.
John, it says it's the net unit potential, so it's the additional unit. So it would be 5 + 1.
Okay, but even then, North Baldwin is 18 units to the acre, so it's under the minimum. They would have to put 7 units, have 7 units in order to hit the minimum.
right?
Or are we counting the existing unit as one? Or however many existing units they have on site?
Yeah, that's a single family home now, and they would need 7 to hit the minimum, so they would have to add 6.
They have that
I mean,
one.
you have to take down the existing one first, but you'd have to build 7, add 6. So I guess we might want to think about the minimum.
Yeah, let's say that, in our work generally in planning and zoning, we would not recommend something like this to be established. It really is as a function of justifying housing element. And if, the issue is that if there is no minimum established, then I think that the realistic capacity that would have to be assumed for these sites is more like, what is the average that's being developed in the city? And given that, your R3 zone allows 13 per acre, and there seems to be a market for that, we might be stuck assuming 13 units per acre for each of these sites, which means we need to find more sites, right?
Well, I guess where I'm at then is I think we need to think about the minimum. We need to think about and be more explicit about what if somebody wants to develop something under the minimum. Do the old R3 standards apply? Can they just not do it? Are there any other incentives that we could bake in to goose them up to get them to the amounts we're after?
Yeah, my puzzlement is that we need to have some incentives, because if you have a big enough lot, why would you build more than you want? For the money, I guess, but I can see development of a courtyard complex where there's smaller units, but not at this same density. And that would be very palatable for a design in town. Whereas if you build to meet these density requirements, you're going to be pushing up against the rest of the neighborhood in terms of size and massing, which are the two issues in town that make everybody, have emotional problems. So, while they can be developed to increase housing, will they develop to meet our arena numbers? And I think that's what we're going to have to sculpt some kind of incentive for them to do that.
Yeah, and I think to Peggy's point that when you get to the bulk and massing, that's really gets to the size of the unit, because you can hit these density numbers without adding, if you use units that aren't so big. But if you want to do all those sort of bigger townhome condo styles, then you're going to have a problem. And I think if you look, for instance, at the one apartment building on, I think it's Mariposa, it's back sort of behind the library that was approved about 5 years ago. That one is within the 13 units the acre, but the FAR is very big. And even then, it's not the density, it's the size. Whereas like that little courtyard one on Baldwin, and it's right where the bus stop is. I'm sorry, no, Sierra Madre Boulevard and the bus stop is Sunnyside, maybe? That one's like twice as high a density as that newer one, but it doesn't look very big at all because it's that courtyard style with smaller units. So I think it's, how can we encourage people to sort of not build as big a units is really what we need to try to do.
Yeah, if the units are smaller, then 20 per acre is not as imposing and as difficult to swallow. If they want to make 20 per acre and have them be big as well, then it's a problem.
Well, the smaller units also would probably meet some of the middle to lower income requirements also. And so maybe that's the carrot that we need to emphasize somehow. Draw people with.
There is, yeah, one of the things about, one of the things that helps the flexibility a little bit, not on the low end of the density range, but on the upper end of the density range is, of course, there is the opportunity for density bonus if the developer is going to, covenant any of those units to being affordable. Then you can get a little bit more flexibility on the top end of the density range.
Right, and that yeah.
What are the criteria again that makes something affordable? Is it just the rent or rent per square foot, or can it just be small so that that kind of limits the rent to a certain degree?
Yeah, there are two types of affordable housing. One is for sale housing, which is at a moderate income level, and moderate income is determined every single year by HCD per county. So the HCD determines what for Los Angeles County constitutes a moderate income household, and then they have the number of individuals per household broken down by income levels. For rental properties, you can have rental properties at very low or low income, and so those are really your two options. Either you have rentals for very low or low, or you have for sale units for moderate. There are other slight variations, but those are the main ones.
But we should note that for any of those to count, for in any legal sense, and for any incentive, those units need to be covenanted. So it's not just because today they're selling, the rent works out where a low income household could afford it, but they need to actually put a covenant on the property stating for at least 55 years. I think 55 is the current, current period of time. You must remain affordable to low income households.
That's too bad. I mean, the covenants are kind of really, my sense, discouraging to developers. They might do something if they didn't have to just build smaller, like a bungalow court that's sold as, if they sold as individual condominiums, then it could be a for sale thing at moderate, but then it still has to be covenanted to count. Wow.
If they would want density bonus, or some kind of other concession in return for it.
Who gets the bonus is the guy that sells it the first time, and after that, when it's owned by somebody and they go to resell it, the covenants caps their ability to make money on that same piece of property.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's an annual report that needs to be submitted for rental properties, and there's a separate report that needs to be submitted for sale properties. We have such an agreement in place now for at least one of the properties in the city, or it's about to be reported.
I mean, I can see a good Samaritan or benevolent landlord building something with small units and renting them out at an affordable price because they understand the bigger social importance. But I think it would be a bridge too far to have somebody sell property and say, by the way, it's going to be capped at this for the next 50 years.
Yeah, I think you're not. Those are going to be rental units, and if it's 10 or 20% of the units, you just look at the whole income stream from the whole property, right? The affordable condominiums is a really tough thing, and the ones we did in town that are the old yak by the school, those requires somebody that's their mission. They're not a profit-seeking developer. So luckily we found somebody like that, and Pasadena Heritage that developer is really great, and so that's useful. But I don't think we can count on that as the model that's going to do most of the development of town.
I mean, the only hope that I see in the long distance future is there's more interest in smaller units. I mean, I think LA City has something going on where they're putting 800 square foot units on lots, and we're looking at ADUs that are of a similar size, but I'm not sure you can do a whole development, you know, based on that.
Yeah.
I am aware of mission-minded, you know, again, developers, affordable housing developers that want to do that kind of development, but as Commissioner Hutt said, it's not the majority of the development industry.
A couple other thoughts I had on the second story setback moving from 25 to 15 feet. I'm not a huge fan of that. I understand the importance of it for adding units. I'm wondering if we can differentiate that between the R320 and the R330 and not have it in the R320, because I really think that, you know, that two-story wall is going to be sort of more imposing, and some of the R320 areas are not too far from single family. So I'd rather limit that front setback to just R330. And then one other thought I had about height is that one of our accepted development practices in town in R1 is to measure height in a sort of kooky way that encourages pitched roofs. And although pitched roofs are not very common on multifamily, it is something that's a development pattern that is very accepted here. And so one of the things we might think about doing is using the same sort of R1 measurement technique, but instead of doing it just at the regular 24 feet, do it at 30 feet, and then allow people to put a third story in that area that's sort of more lofts kind of thing. So you could have a situation where you have effectively 3 stories, but it sort of looks like 2 because the third story is pitched, sort of like a mansard roof kind of concept. I think that's going to be a lot more palatable, and I would like to consider that as an option for at least the R320. But if we have this other option that allows, you know, sort of traditional 3-story multifamily in some places, that this is another option people could look into, and you could have the top 2 stories could be a sort of loft space, and that could allow some development which I think would have a more minimal impact. But I do think that if you are going to do that, you'd want to push the second story back 25 feet so that the pitch would start from there as opposed to 15 feet.
Commissioner Hutt, could I, sorry to put you on the spot here, but
yep.
If we were to use the height limit, you know, calculate it in the same way that the R1 is, as you suggested, in the R1, the actual limit is 25 feet. Do you have a sense of what the limit should be in this case?
Well, in R1, it's 24, but we allow people to go up to 30 if there's a special architectural need. And then that's not measured to the very top. It's measured to a third of the way up the pitch. So you could actually get a much taller building. So I would think you would have 30 feet height measured to the top, to the third of the way up the pitch of the roof. And that way you could effectively get a third story in that dormer sort of space. You know, you put dormers and whatnot, and it wouldn't be as big as the stories below. So you'd reduce that sense of massing, but you could totally do that. And it's not allowed under our R1 code because it would count as a story, and you can only have two, even though perhaps some people illegally convert their attics. But if we said you could just do it, right, and then people could use some of that space, I think that would be a pretty cool way to sort of blend in that third story, especially in areas that are closer to R1 zones.
With the architecture in town, the dormers would fit in. I was thinking dormers as well, and you could use that as. Are we going to publish examples of possible ways to make this work? Because we're only going to get one review of whatever it is they build, correct? And so, can we kind of seed the idea of like, hey, this is the kind of appearance that we're looking for, and you can get that third story in under this kind of a roof with these dormers?
That would be, to produce kind of a design guidelines, or to produce a more robust set of standards in this. And that's certainly not a bad thing to do. I think given the time limitations of this project, we sort of just laid out the most fundamental ones. But
it might lead them in a direction which we would find more palatable in the long run, as opposed to hoping. Because we've seen some ice cube trays, and it's probably not the direction we want to go.
Yeah, I think that that's a great idea. And, in the past, when we did the R3 update and then when we did the commercial code update, we included some, and going even farther back in the hillside update, we did some this, not this kind of diagrams. If we don't have time for that kind of thing, I think maybe what we could do is move an actual code forward and then try to produce some of that material, because to a certain extent all we're going to get to do is recommend anyhow, right? We're not, if somebody meets the rules, they get a build. So it's not as if we're going to be able to say enforce that, but it would give guidance to people. I think that would be helpful, and so maybe we could produce some of those kind of charts and the diagrams afterwards if we don't have time to fit them in now.
If I could ask the Planning Commission, I'm curious what the commissioners think about this option of this preliminary review. As staff was thinking it through, we wanted to give the commission an opportunity to comment, even though they don't have the opportunity to render the final decision. So we were kind of in a difficult situation because the director ultimately makes the decision, but we wanted to give the opportunity for some feedback. So does the commission like this idea, or do they think it's a waste of time?
Well, a peer review is always nice, but if the applicant is set in their way, it's not going to help.
If the applicant has a design that they've used for the last 14 of their developments and they just are going to regurgitate it in here no matter what, then it's going to be a lost cause. So a lot of it is the attitude of the applicant. But I am always in favor of putting stuff in front of the public and having people comment and giving some kind of a feedback loop so that maybe changes can be made. And it might just be that they, plant 2 more trees, in the back corner to protect the single family resident that is next door. But I absolutely think that there should be some way for the public and the commission to provide input. Now, we all agree that they can say, yeah, thank you, and go on their merry way. But at least, that came up, and there was that, and there was that option. And in this town, I think that is eminently critical, because we have citizens who are very interested and very concerned. I mean, they're even watching this Zoom meeting, God bless them. So that needs to be part of the program, because that's.
Yeah, I agree, and I think having it earlier in the process rather than later. I mean, if someone has a full set of construction drawings, we all know what's going to get built, right? So we want very preliminary. So, you know, we can put our 2 cents in and they can take as much of it as they desire. But I think it's also informative and educational for the commission, the staff, and the town as a whole, because, you know, we're in this arena round, right? And we could amend these particular zoning codes. We're going to have to deal with stuff at the next cycle. And so it'll be helpful to us to see what happens after we put this stuff out. We might get some designs in that we're like, oh my God, we didn't think about that. That's horrible. Or you know, maybe, hey, that's a really great thing. Let's encourage that even more for the next round. So I think it's not just all about that one project, although I think it's useful to give advice and people might like it or not. But it's also a feedback loop, as Bob was saying. They can help us understand where we want to go next.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm always, oops.
You muted yourself, Bill.
Okay. I'm always in favor of being able to learn something from the process. You know, we have things like the cell towers that we really have very little jurisdiction over, and yet we get some concessions, you know, by the builder and things like that, just cosmetic arrangements and stuff. So I think it's always helpful. I think you're right, and also I agree with John. It allows us to learn stuff for the next time, and you know, that's what our experience is supposed to be about here. So those are good suggestions.
I'm asking because we may be able to use this in the future for other types of approvals too. Just because HCD is saying has to be approved at the staff level doesn't always mean that we can't have some kind of review. So we're just exploring our options. So thank you for that feedback. It's helpful.
Well, I appreciate.
Yep. Thanks. Okay. So I guess going forward, do we have enough input from this, or I'm not even sure if we need to make a decision since we want some more information on this. Is that
we
correct?
haven't taken public comment yet, Chair.
Oh, that too. Okay. Well, is there any more questions or any more comments about? Okay.
I have one more comment on this sort of technical one on item. Let's see, what is it? 1729030E floor area ratio. I don't think we should talk about what floor area is. We already have a definition of that, and we already have too many definitions in town for what floor area is. So let's just use our standard floor area rate definition and delete the parenthetical here. And if for some reason we feel like we need to amend it, we can look at that. But I think this is just setting up another difference process that we don't need. I'd also like to think about the concept of the vertical facade plane change, and we had a couple of diagrams about that and what that means as far as how far it needs to go back. In R3, we have a 35 feet area there, and then we say it has to go back for at least 5 feet for a span of 10. So it's not clear to me as we have it written here, you know, what that facade plane change needs to be. Can it be 2 inches? Does it need to be as in the picture where there's like no structure at all? And for how long does that space need? I think, you know, in the past, what we've done is we've relied on design review and say, we'll figure it out when we get there, but that's not an option. So I think we should be more clear about what we mean by that and how that's accomplished.
Understood. On the floor area ratio thing, perhaps while public comment is going, I'm going to look that up. I do recall there was a very specific reason.
Yeah, just as background, we have 3 floor area definitions in town. We have our R1, we have hillside, and then we have the general one, which would apply here if we didn't look into it. So I would rather not create a 4th unless we absolutely need to.
Understood.
I have a question question about the third story, and just reading through the report in 1729-040, they talk about the element is located 45 feet away from any public street. But when we get over to the religious housing, it says 2 stories of grade 40 feet from a public street. Is there a reason why they're different?
No, they could be made the same.
Okay. It was something I didn't understand.
It was just the very particulars of the the particular studies that we did,
Okay.
but they could be made the same.
All right, very good. Anything else, Peggy? Before I go to,
Yeah, just a couple of typos. Where in the 2 places where you talked about open space that's needed per unit, the word square has been left out of square feet. It goes 250 feet, which is the square feet. And on the other one, it's 150 or 175 feet. It should be 175 square feet.
oh.
Kind of bothered me.
Very good. Okay, that's G. Yeah. Okay. All right. If nothing else, then I'll open up the public comment. Anybody who's listening in can come in and make a comment. Limit your comment to, I'll say 3 minutes. And we'll give you 3 minutes to call in as well. Nobody so far, Christian?
Nobody yet.
Okay. 1 minute and 13 seconds left. Okay, about 30 seconds left. We'll just wait this out. Wish you could make this more. This is dry. This is dry enough material as it is. I wish we could make it more interesting by, getting the segment from Dr. No where they're counting down, the launch of the nuclear missiles. Make it entertaining. Okay, 5 seconds. And very good. So. Time's up. No comments. Very good. All right. So we'll bring it back to the commission. I guess we made some inquiries. I'm trying to think. Do we need to? Since there's nothing really to, we're really not going to vote on this, I guess, until we get some more information. Correct?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to say something about the third story because that's going to make people tense. I do believe that there are places in this town where you can put a 3-story building. I think slope is a critical factor because I think there are places in town where the slope of the lot is such that the third story would be here. I mean, the building I'm in was a historical building, and the back is 3 stories and the front is 2, and you can't tell. I think the example you used on Highland is a good example because behind it is a very tall building up on the next street, and it doesn't look out of place. It's sympathetic to the rest of the community, the rest of the buildings around it. But how you write that into your language will be the trick. So it may have a lot to do with the topography of the lot, and so that could be very helpful. But I know that in order for these things to pencil out, sometimes you have to go higher. But to have that happen, in the middle of downtown Sierra Madre, I think would be a hard pill for people to swallow because it would stick up incredibly high, and it would be, people would look at it as an eyesore. I mean, I listen to people today. There's a cell tower going in next to the fire station. I listened to people complain to me today about the crane that's putting it up. So, people notice these things.
Okay. Thanks, Bob.
And we can't limit it to the south side of the street, can we? Because I mean that's where the slope naturally falls off.
Right. Unfortunately, Mariposa, that whole block is north side.
Yeah. Yeah, see, that's problematic.
Yeah.
Although in your example, you put the 3 stories at the back closer to the, police fire building, which is a taller building. So the relative difference between those two would be minimized. It's when it's when you have a single story little, 1,500-foot bungalow next door and there's a 3-story building next to it that it begins to become an issue.
Yeah.
I
But
agree with
that.
I'm sorry. I agree with the slope
Go ahead.
being important, but actually, the one on Highland, it's a little bungalow in the front, and the 3 stories is at the back of the property, but it backs up to like a townhome complex on the street behind, so the height difference there also isn't that big of a deal. And the reason it works with on the upslope on Highland is because it is so far back. So there's a lot to be said for that 40 or 45 feet distance because it's all sight lines. You just don't see
Yeah,
stuff.
I think that's a really good point.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree.
We focused a lot on the RH, but a couple comments on or mostly just really one overarching comment on 1739. Can we change the name of this to institutional housing overlay? I realize that we're talking about it now for just a couple of churches, but there's no reason in the future this should be limited to churches. And I don't think we want to make it like a religious thing. It's just really an institutional thing. So if we change the name to institutional housing overlay, and then the purpose, we could say, provide churches and other institutional uses the ability. Because I don't think there's anything fundamental about a religion that has to go along with this housing. It's just an institutional use.
So then Alberno could build housing?
Well, they're not zoned for this. They could if they
institutional,
changed their
isn't it?
zone and we allowed it, but right now there's only 2 that are zoned for this. And, down the road, we might need to pick more sites.
Commissioner, I'll say, certainly within all of your prerogative, and Vincent perhaps could speak to whether to make the name change or not. I'll just say there is one difference between religious uses and general institutional uses from a planning perspective that plays into this, and that has motivated kind of the state laws that are targeting more religious uses, which is that the assumption that parking on a religious site is used infrequently. It's only used, you know, once a week, or anyway, it might be more than that, but not the whole week, like an office building or a school or some other kind of institutional use. Certainly, you can do. Certainly, it could be institutional as well, should the city decide to.
I think we'll have to have that conversation with Karen Warner, our housing consultant, to see if that's going to create any issues.
Yeah, I think the name religious housing overlay was paired with the parking exemption from a state law. So we'll have to check with Karen.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I guess we'll move this. This is an item we're going to sort of put on the timetable then, Director Gonzalez, at some point.
Yes, we could continue it to a date certain. I think to give our consultant and staff enough time, really realistically, the next meeting we would select would be February 17th, if that is amenable to Bill Burns.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good. So with all the suggestions and comments, do I have a motion? I guess I do need to make a motion to move this to a date certain, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I move we continue to, what was it? You said February 17th?
Correct.
I'll second.
Seconded. And so we need a roll call vote.
Chair Pesner?
Yes. Aye.
Commissioner Nellis?
Yes.
Commissioner Hutt?
Yes.
Commissioner Spears?
Yes.
Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, very good. All right, we'll move that forward. So then we can move on to the second item and the last item on our, or at least in terms of our discussions, the municipal code text amendments, the priority list.
Yes, and I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see this. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So let me see if I'm able to even advance my slide here. I'm using two different monitors. And it's not letting me advance. Here we go. So the purpose of this meeting, and it's going to be fairly brief, is basically to prioritize the municipal code text amendments for city council direction. So we have a number that we've collected over time. Some of them are requirements by the state, so state mandate updates, such as responding to SB 9, such as urban lot splits, ADU ordinances, which is not included on this list because we are currently working on that now. Other things that we've done in the past is to create an annual ordinance cleanup. So some of those items are listed and we'll go through what those are. And also to prioritize some of the suggestions that came from the Planning Commission. So state mandates, as I mentioned, accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units we're currently working on, and that'll come before the Planning Commission fairly shortly. The next thing that we'll also have to do is the urban lot split in response to Senate Bill 9 and the affordable housing ordinance to conform to state density bonus law. Another one that we will have to address is called the Starter Home Revitalization Act. And that is pursuant to Assembly Bill 803, which allows multifamily lot splits, very similar like the urban lot split for single family zones. And lastly, on the state mandates is the ministerial design review permits, which is permitted through Senate Bill 9, but it requires the establishment of objective standards and regulations that will govern development of qualified residential projects. So our city attorney is working on many of these, and staff has met with him on a couple of occasions to go over and provide feedback. The next category is our general ordinance cleanup. So the list that we have, we've collected over at least a 2-year period. It actually goes back to when we were updating the commercial code as well as the parking code updates. And if you recall, there were a number of things that we were not able to advance, and the city council adopted some components of those, but not others. So what we wanted to do is to reincorporate those. Number one was just to remove the minor conditional use permit for arbors and decorative features in the front yard setback. So the planning commission has already drafted language. To many of these, we want to be able to move these forward through city council and get these codified. Another one is provide an administrative design review permit to reduce prevailing front yard setback to 25 feet in the R1 zone. In some cases, we feel that these could be handled as an administrative design review permit instead of going before the commission as a design review permit. Also, to reinstate the covered parking requirement in the R1, R2, and RC zones. For some reason, that was dropped in the language, in the revised language. We need to reinstate that. And also the commission at the time discussed the requirement for licensed architects be required for both administrative design review and design review permits, including the hillside development permit applications. And also to fix a lot of the issues that we knew were going to arise in the manufacturing zone along East Montecito in terms of cross references to the commercial zone, so it functions a little bit more realistically. All of these, I think, are pretty easy fixes. We've identified them previously, and we could do that fairly easily. The next one is to amend, we haven't had a discussion about this yet, but it's to amend a process for discretionary demolition permits for properties that come back with an historic status code of 6Z. What that means is that we require all properties to get an historic resources evaluation report if they're 75 years of age and older. So right away, we know when those reports come back, if those projects are not eligible for designation as a local landmark, are they architecturally or culturally, then there's really no need or requirement, or really no need to process a discretionary demolition permit for those properties if we know that they are not eligible. So we want to modify the code to be able to accommodate that. Moving on, we need to amend the language. There's been some concern or confusion about the term RH, residential hillside. So there's some clarification that needs to be made, or distinction between hillside designation and high density designation. So we wanted to address that. We also wanted to include structures or properties that are deemed eligible for listing as a landmark but less than 75 years of age. We have had one property, mid-century modern property, that was designated as an historic landmark and was also eligible at the state level for designation, but it was less than 75 years of age. So that was something that staff brought forward that slightly deviated from that. If we look at the Wisteria House, that was also deemed to be eligible for designation as a high style mid-century modern property, but it is also less than 75 years of age. So we wanted to get a little bit more flexibility in the code when we come across those situations. We also wanted to review and amend the hillside management zone to include a requirement for administrative design review permit, also to include a reference to height restrictions, and also to amend setbacks for garages in the R3 zones to be 3 feet from side and rear side setbacks, or setbacks, which would be the same requirement as for detached garages in those zones. And of course, we still have to update our R2 code, which has been put on hold, as you know, because of many other things that keep coming up each year, including many of the state mandates. And we also had some suggestions from the Planning Commission that we heard. One of them is to reduce the maximum allowed floor area in all residential zones by 800 square feet to offset development of accessory dwelling units. And also to consider pre-approved ADUs or city purchase plans or a contract with an architect to streamline the process for the development of accessory dwelling units. We also talked about development guidelines and a standards booklet and design guidelines and standards in the commercial zone and also for the multifamily zone. Again, these would all have to be objective development standards that we would create, since subjective standards would not be permissible under current code. So moving forward, basically what we were asking the commission to do, if you saw anything that was kind of out of order, or if you wanted to bring something to the forefront, we can go ahead and modify the list that I just presented. But essentially what we want to do is to prioritize and make this recommendation to the city council so that we can move forward on many of the items, not necessarily the state mandated items, but the other 2 options before you. That concludes my presentation.
Can I add 2 suggestions?
Yes.
One of them is a list of approved arborists for the city, since we've just gotten over a little concern with cutting back the wisteria vine. And the other is to somehow begin to address the soft first story issue, because we have a lot of buildings in town that will be badly damaged in an earthquake, and it will change forever the look of the city if we don't do something about it.
Yes, that's a very good suggestion.
Yeah, I think on Bob's first suggestion, either a list or do it like we do on historical evaluations, do a single source. If we did a single source arborist, I think hopefully that would end up being a lot cheaper and would give us continuity. But we need to do something in that realm, yes, because we're really getting very disparate advice.
And I'll coordinate that effort with the Public Works Department.
Is the goal here, I mean, we've got 3 separate lists or type of items. Are we trying to overall prioritize or prioritize within each group, or?
Within each group, I would eliminate the state mandates. I just wanted to make you aware of what we were going to be reviewing very, very shortly. Mm-hmm. So that's coming up next. But looking at, I think some of the really general ordinance cleanup items, we have that language. I think we can get that done really quickly. And I think it'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I sort of see in the ordinance cleanup ones, sort of three groups.
Mhm.
There's items 5 and 6 that are dealing with demolition and historic, and those are things we haven't dealt with before. So if we could put those together.
Okay.
The R2 code, unfortunately, is sort of a bigger bite.
It is.
So I would put that at the end. But I would think that all of the other ones we could combine in like one sort of big omnibus cleanup, because they're all stuff we've either seen the language on, discussed before, or we're fixing typos, right? And
right.
All that stuff we should be able to get through really pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. So maybe what we do is that general cleanup could be something that we can bring in first, and then concentrate on the historic issues that we discussed, and then have R2 at the end.
Yeah.
And then the commissioner suggestions component of this, some of it may require consultant outreach and bring them on board to try to flush some of this out. As you know, when staff as well as the Planning Commission spent a lot of time trying to come up with objective design standards, and that was a very difficult task.
Yeah, I think that the R2 code sort of goes into that as well, because that's still multifamily, right? And we're not going to be able to do subjective design review. So, so yeah, the reworking of R3, the commercial and R2, I think those sort of all go together. And that, I agree, that's going to take a heavier lift.
Okay.
I think reducing the floor area is something we could do pretty quickly, and I think that's also pretty important, because I think through sort of unexpected implementation or interpretation of the state ADU laws, we've effectively increased our allowed floor area by 800 square feet, which I don't think anybody's in favor of. And so that's something I think we should fix, and we could look at in the different zones. I mean, because that cuts across hillside, R1, canyon. I don't know if it makes a whole bunch of difference outside of those three. And in R2 and R3, there's a lot more other issues going on. Apparently, in missing middle, now we have to have at least one FAR, which we didn't know about. So I would think about looking at that just in the single family zones. And that, to me, seems like a pretty high priority.
Okay. I think we have a clear
consensus. You
process
have
forward.
Sure. Okay.
We do have to open it up for public comment.
Okay. Sure. Peggy, any last things you want to say? I'm just going to give you a chance.
No, it all sounded good.
Okay. So then I'll open up for public comment, and we'll give the callers 3 minutes to call in.
Can I ask a question while we wait?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So, Director Gonzalez, in terms of some of these items, particularly in the commissioner suggestions, as you mentioned, it seemed that a lot of them, would be, projects that would, seem ripe for consultants. Do you have budget? You have budgeted amounts for this kind of stuff, or would this also require, request for funding?
This would most likely require a request for funding, or we tackle that effort in the next fiscal year and we budget for that.
Got it. All right, thank you.
May I make a comment?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that one of the list items here, number 11, I looked at that recently and it looked like the typo for the 80% site coverage has fixed itself. So I don't know if that actually needs to be addressed. Another comment I had, just as kind of just as staff, and Commissioner Hutt had at some point in the past pointed out if we could use the re-up zoning of all the lots that got affected by our down zoning last September as a way to, and incorporate SB8 to use that to reduce maximum floor area allowed in residential zones for ADUs. I just wanted to kind of give an update in that we're finding an ambiguous definition of what residential capacity means per SB8, and we don't know what can be offset by, you know, reduction of 800 square foot across the board on single family zones. So because the city council wanted to expedite the re-up zoning, I would kindly ask that we can get that moving forward without considering it as kind of a banking, so to say, to offset the reduction. And that's it.
And to add up to Planner Wolf's point, to resolve that ambiguity, we've drafted a list of questions that we're going to be submitting to HCD. So hopefully we'll have some clarity about that.
Great, thank you. 20 seconds. Anybody in the queue?
You do not have anyone in the queue.
Thank you. Seven seconds and counting. Okay, very good. Time's up. All right, so I guess is this going to be an item, date certain type of item, Vince, or just something when you'll bring it back when you have the various sections done?
Basically what we'll do is the commission will make a motion and I will agendize that before city council for their consideration.
Okay, so we need a motion to prioritize as suggested, and you have the priorities that we stipulated?
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead, Peggy.
It just, it might be helpful to the commission if you identify the ones that might need a consultant.
Yes, we can do that. And I'll inform the city council regarding that issue as well.
Thank you. Okay, so then can I entertain a motion?
Also move that we proceed with the amended list. Approve the amended list.
Okay. So moved.
Second.
And seconded. And we need a roll call vote.
Chair
Jen? Yes, aye.
Commissioner Dallas,
Yes.
Commissioner Hutt,
Yes.
Commissioner Spears.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right, moving on. We have any planning commission reports? Anything? Anybody want to volunteer to help Bob on the trail?
Actually,
I hear you have a chainsaw.
I do have a chainsaw, but I've started another little project. I want to re-landscape the front of the post office. The landscaping that's there was put in when the post office was built in 1961 and has not changed since then. And I think it would be a good example of using drought-tolerant landscaping and native plants. And so we're accepting money through the Community Foundation, which makes it tax deductible. And we're going to re-landscape the front of the post office.
Wonderful. Doing something for the federal government.
Well, it's a leased facility, so it's owned by a private individual, but it's the community's, it's like the community's front yard. So, I mean, we did a nice job around City Hall with the native plants, and I think we can do the same thing in front of the post office, and hopefully it will encourage people to it will set an example for people and see what they can do, and also maybe increase the use of the post office, because we certainly don't want to lose that capability in the town. Currently, there are only 3 people working in that building. So we're going to try to do what we can to, you know, gin up some interest and support of the post office without the post office having to pay, because they don't pay.
Yeah. Oh, and the homeowner, I mean, the owner of the building, correct?
The owner of the building is a nice little old lady that lives far away, and as long as we don't damage the building, she has no interest.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. Well, planning, preservation, and department reports. Director Gonzalez.
Yes, I wanted to take this time to remind the commissioners that we will be hosting the Sierra Madre Honors Dinner on January 19th.
Oh.
Okay. I think that got changed, didn't it?
Oh, it did get changed, yes.
Yeah, it's on February 9th now, I believe.
Yes.
And in a recent conversation I had with Carol Canterbury, it may even go later, so that, you know, Omicron will have dissipated and we won't have to be in a tent. So, fingers are crossed.
Otherwise, I think we have a virtual dinner. Is that it?
There you go.
Yeah, that last I talked to Susan, she wanted to push it out so that it could be in person. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Our February 3rd Planning Commission meeting, we will be discussing the density bonus urban lot splits and the ministerial design review permits and is that still moving forward, Alex?
Yes, please eat dinner ahead of time and bring coffee.
Okay, so that's February 3rd. And on February 15th, we do have a date set for a joint study session with the City Council and Planning Commission regarding the Meadows at Bailey Canyon project. It's not a public hearing, it's a public meeting, basically to be able to get both bodies in the same room so they can hear the same presentation and ask questions, and everybody can participate in that forum.
February 18th?
That is on the 15th, February 15th.
1-5, okay, thank you.
Logistics still yet to be determined. We would like to do it indoors in the City Council chambers. Let's see how things progress with COVID. On the 17th, we continued the R3 and church overlay amendments. So that is already on queue, and possibly the Penny House is going to be coming back before the Planning Commission, possibly that day as well, for a conditional use permit to reinstate that project as a bed and breakfast inn. So that's being presented a second time. They never took advantage of that prior ownership.
So it was approved and then lapsed?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
So that's all I have for the commission today.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Then, without much further ado, I guess we will adjourn our meeting to February 3rd. Very good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.